This week's word of the week is lepidus, scales. Comes from lepis, which means the shell, like of an egg or of a nut, or the scale of a fish or a reptile. It is the relatively rigid, thin, arched surface that goes around something or that forms a covering of something. It's a strange choice for the word of the week. Why? Because it only occurs once in the New Testament. But it's a very significant experience that involves this word, lepidus, scales. It happens in Acts chapter 9, verse 18, and it's about Saul of Tarsus on his road to Damascus. Why was Saul going to Damascus? Because Saul was so intent on persecuting the young Christian church that he didn't want to stay in Jerusalem and Judea and talk about it. He wanted to go on the road and find these people and round them up. So he got warrants from the leaders at the temple so that he could actually go off on the road, find these people, and send them back to be persecuted, prosecuted, and punished. He was going to stomp on this young church. On the way, we're told that a light from heaven shone, a bright light, and that a voice spoke, and only Saul could hear the voice. Everyone in the group could see the light, but only Saul could hear the voice. The voice said, "Saul, why are you persecuting me?" He said, "Who are you?" And he said, "I am Jesus whom you are persecuting. Go into the city, go into Damascus, and wait and do what I tell you to do. Follow your instructions." So here we get this very powerful description in verses 8 and 9 of Acts chapter 9. This is from the ESV. Saul rose from the ground, and although his eyes were opened, he saw nothing. So they led him by the hand and brought him into Damascus. And for 3 days he was without sight, and neither ate nor drank. So the light was so bright, we don't know exactly how the functioning of this worked. The light was bright, everyone could see the light, only Saul heard the voice, but at the end of it, even though his eyes were opened, Saul could see nothing at all. He was completely blind and had to be led by the hand into the city. Think about it. This is a powerful, aggressive man on a mission who now has been humbled to the point where he has to be led by the hand, enfeebled, can't even guide himself along anymore. Pretty powerful. How long is he in this condition? 3 days. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound like anything else where someone is in the darkness for 3 days? Pretty significant. Then we're told a guy named Ananias is instructed by Christ to go see Saul, to lay hands on him, and to tell him that he's sent by Jesus and to tell him what he's to do next. And this is where we get the great part about the lepidus, the scales. This is Acts chapter 9, verses 18 and 19 from the ESV, and I have added our word of the week in Greek. And immediately something like scales, hos lepides. He doesn't say scales fell from his eyes. Immediately something like scales, because real scales would be a piece of an eggshell or a nutshell or fish scales or a snake scale. But these are not those. These are something like scales. Your eyes don't have real scales. So whatever came out of his eyes were something like scales. Fell from his eyes, and he regained his sight. Then he rose and was baptized, and taking food, he was strengthened. So 3 days in the darkness, 3 days without food or drink. Like the old life has ended, he's been buried, and now with Christ he has this new life. He winds up with a resurrected life. Saul is dead, Paul is born. These things that are like scales fall from his eyes, and he can see again. His vision that he used to have led him toward destruction and persecution. Now he has a new vision. He has new sight. He has a new life. How do we know that he has a new life? He himself tells us by his next act. It says he was baptized. So think back to John the Baptist's early ministry. And when Jesus' disciples started baptizing people, the Jewish leaders were upset by the baptizing. Why? Because baptism was a rite and a ritual for conversion of Gentiles to Judaism. They didn't think it was proper for Jews to get baptized. That was conversion into the covenant people. That was to become a faithful person. Now, Paul, Saul of Tarsus, educated to a great extent on the customs and laws of his people. He tells us that himself, about himself. He knows that. And what does he do when his eyes are opened? When something like scales fell from his eyes and he can see again? He is baptized. Saul of Tarsus tells us he's had a conversion experience by virtue of being baptized. Then he starts to eat and drink, regains his strength, and is able to go back out into the world. He has been converted from Saul the persecutor to Paul the proselytizer. Magnificent. So let us carry on. There are passages that refer to Paul, having poor eyesight. He says, look at the big characters in which I write. He says, I'm not an impressive person to see. I'm bald. I can't see well. So a lot of people have said, well, the not seeing well is either an explanation for what happened here, or at minimum is a consequence of what happened here. They want to make Saul's eyesight sort of a lifelong problem, and maybe come up with explanations for it. Is this a cataract problem? Is this glaucoma? Pliny the Elder writes about a medical condition where there's an unnatural sort of overgrowth of skin across the eye, and he says that there's a delicate and dangerous medical procedure to try and remove this skin from the eye. It's tempting to try and read that in here. One of the problems with that is none of the surviving medical texts from the time speak to this procedure. And also, there are words for skin, right? We're told, Luke, when he writes this, writes about something like scales, not skin, something like scales that isn't pulled away from his eye, it falls away from his eyes. And when it falls away, he can now see, right? So if we go with the congenital problem or a function of aging like glaucoma or cataracts, we're losing sight, pardon the pun, of the magnificence of the story. Saul of Tarsus has his life interrupted on the road to Damascus. He's stricken blind in heavenly light that only affects him that way. It doesn't affect the other people in the group that way. Only he hears the voice of Christ. His life as he knows it ends there. He's taken by the hand in darkness, and he sits without food or drink, without light, without anything happening for 3 days. Then Ananias comes, lays hands on him, and boom, the things like scales fall away, and Paul starts a new life in Christ with a new mission and a new vision. If we try to make this a natural occurrence, we rob the story of its power. The persecutor was stricken down on the road to Damascus. And when he leaves Damascus, he's not a persecutor, he's a proselytizer. He's an apostle sent by Jesus to spread the word. Powerful, powerful stuff. Don't rob it of its power by trying to explain away the blindness and the things like scales that fell from his eyes. So, Paul is so moved by this experience that he talks about it frequently. And there are 2 other times in the book of Acts where he recounts the experience. First, in Acts chapter 22, he recounts what Ananias said to him. This is verses 14 and 15 of Acts 22. And he said, "The God of our fathers appointed you to know his will, to see the righteous one, and to hear a voice from his mouth. For you will be a witness for him to everyone of what you have seen and heard. So the blindness allowed him to see the righteous one. No one can see God and survive. Moses comes down the mountain, his face glows, he has to wear a veil. But Saul, we're told, saw the righteous one, and as a result, he's stricken blind. But Paul, who has seen the righteous one, can now go and testify. He's a witness to what he has seen and heard, as Ananias tells him, this is your new mission. And finally, Paul understands that the 3 days with the scales on his eyes conditioned him for the mission. Listen to Acts 26:18, and please, when we're done, go back and read the few verses that precede it and get the whole thing in context. There's a lot there. I don't want to take up too much more of your time. But here's verse 18 and 26. To open their eyes so that they may turn from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and a place among those who are sanctified by faith in me. So Paul says that the message of Jesus to him about his mission, his co-mission to go forward, is an eye-opening mission. He says, go to open their eyes so that they may turn from darkness to light. His experience on the road to Damascus, 3 days in the darkness, the things like scales falling away, being baptized, celebrating a conversion and going forward, is the epitome of his own mission. He becomes an eye-opener. He becomes one who turns people from darkness to light, because that's what his experience with Jesus on the road to Damascus was. A marching, conquering general was stricken down, was conquered by Christ, not through force of arms, but through a revelation of self. He was blinded, led, weak and frail in darkness for 3 days until the things fell away like scales and he could now see. He knew the truth. He expressed his conversion in that baptism, and he went forward no longer as a persecutor, but as a proselytizer, as not one who seeks to end the church, but one who goes forward to build the church. Lapides, scales. Hos lapides, things that are like scales. From lepis, scale. It's our word of the week, not because it's prevalent, but because it's so potent. The world was changed because Saul of Tarsus was stricken blind on the road to Damascus, and Paul, the apostle, walked forward to open the eyes of those who are walking in darkness. Wow, great stuff. Hope that was good for you. If it was, you know what to do. And until next time, Charis Kairene Humin, grace and peace to you.